Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Agony and Ecstasy of Being a Sustainable Business Entrepreneur. My name is Emily McGill, and I'll be moderating today's session with David Van Cedars. I'm calling in from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples out in Whistler, BC, specifically the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stolo nations. For context on my role here today, I graduated from McGill's Bioresource engineering program in the last decade, and since then, I've evolved from full-time employment to nearly full-time consulting and founding community-centric sustainability enterprises. I've been inspired and educated by David's initiatives over the years, and so given this, I'm really looking forward to learning about David's path from his years at McGill to now, and especially what we can learn from his mistakes and successes. This McGill Alumni event is being held in collaboration with the Faculty of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences, which we both graduated from. A neat alumni update from that campus is that McGill's School of Environment will be renamed the Buehler School of Environment following an endowment gift of $15 million. And this is honoring Mark Buehler, who graduated with an agricultural diploma in 1958, and he received a bachelor's in 1964. His career since then has been in agri-food entrepreneurship, spanning several different industries, including cattle, apples, and maple syrup, very convenient for Quebec. He's also recognized as almost single-handedly building the Quebec cranberry industry. He's always had a profound attachment to the land and a deep respect for the natural environment, which I'm sure many of us share. Through his endowment, he aims to advance environmental research and scholarship at McGill University, which is really aligned with today's topic. I'm grateful to the alumni advancement offices at McGill for their work. During COVID, they've hosted events like this and continued diligently reaching out to connect alumni. I hope that today's session gives us all a sense of the community that we're tapped into, even virtually and remotely, as lockdowns continue to wave across the world. And this is a very international audience today, so again, welcome. A couple of housekeeping notes. Today's event is split roughly half and half between David's talk and then a Q&A period. Please do submit questions using the chat box throughout the presentation, and we'll be following up with them in the latter half of the hour. Note that if we don't get to your question today, we will be following up with answers in a PDF. And this session is also being recorded and will be posted online sometime after the event. Without further ado, let me introduce our speaker today, David Van Cedars. An innovator and entrepreneur in his community, David's work in green entrepreneurship and coaching has had widespread ripple effects, both in our region and beyond. For those attending who also went to McDonald campus, a fun fact about David is that it was during his term as president on the campus that the local gathering place on the McDonald campus, the Kaylee, was founded and built. This in some way foreshadows the innovations that David has engaged in since graduating, from founding a series of green enterprises to building out now a coaching practice for the coming generations of green entrepreneurs. A couple of the enterprises that David has founded that are close to my heart are Spud, a sustainable urban delivery service for produce, which has become a leader in its field based in Vancouver, and also Wayblaze, which is taking crowdfunding back into our communities. So thank you so much, David, for being here to share your learnings with us, and looking forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Emily. So I'm going to try to cover a number of topics that I hope will, at least some of them will be relevant to almost every one of you. So I'm going to first talk about my personal journey to how I became a sustainable business entrepreneur. I want to talk about how to choose your entrepreneurial venture, if you're thinking about that, lessons I've learned, how to survive as an entrepreneur, the agony parts mostly, and how you can decide if you should become an entrepreneur. And finally, the fifth one, ways that you can become more entrepreneurial, even in non-entrepreneurial situations. But before I begin my talk, I want to get a little bit of a sense of who is in the audience. And so I'd like to just do a quick poll, and hopefully you can figure out how to use the voting features. So there are 4 options. You should see that coming up on your screen. And here they are. So choose one of the following. I am an entrepreneur, I'm not currently an entrepreneur, but I want to become one. I'm unsure, but want to learn more about entrepreneurship. And the fourth one, I'm dead set against it. I'm here only to heckle David in the chat box. So choose which of those best applies to you, and I'll give you 15 seconds to do that, and then we will share the results. All right, hopefully everyone has had a chance to make their best selection, and let's see what the results are. So, interesting. So the largest group is those I'm unsure about, but want to learn more about entrepreneurship. And then the second group is I'm also an entrepreneur. I just would like to ask the organizers to, disinvite those people who chose the fourth option. Actually, I'm just kidding. But you're welcome to heckle me, and I'll do my best to respond. So let's dive right in. So I want to first by saying that I never planned to become an entrepreneur. I started university at a university in the Maritimes in biology and psychology. However, a woman that I knew from Montreal, where I lived previously, and I really liked, was enrolled in the environmental biology program at McDonald campus at McGill. We started writing together long distance letters, and it didn't take much time to convince me that I needed to transfer to her program in her university at McGill. So I enrolled in the environmental biology program at Mac and started a relationship with this woman. Well, the relationship ended after a year, but my love for the environment and what I learned at McGill has lasted me a lifetime. After university, I worked as a biologist, first for government and then for a consulting firm. My entrepreneur dream was still nowhere in sight. But then I got promoted to becoming the manager of the environmental consulting firm that I was working at. But I had no clue how to manage. I knew that I needed to make the profits go higher and the losses get smaller, but really I had no idea how to do that. So I decided to go back to university and get my MBA. And I was working in Alberta, so I went to the University of Alberta. And somewhere about 2/3 of the way through my MBA, I had one of these cathartic experiences. I suddenly realized that if I was really serious about preventing pollution, not just cleaning it up after the fact, which tended to be the type of work that I did as an environmental biologist, we really needed an entirely different set of skills, many of which were found in the domain of business. So when I graduated, I did the first semi-entrepreneurial thing in my life and decided to pursue a job in a field where no jobs existed. Instead of going back to my environmental consulting firm, which I could have easily done, I moved to Vancouver and went to then all of the big 8 management consulting firms with the idea of setting up an environmental business consulting practice. Well, they all turned me down flat, telling me to go back to the environmental consulting firms or environmental engineering firms. And but I was persistent and said, I really feel that there's an opportunity with someone who's got business skills to find markets for recyclable materials, to do new kinds of full cost accounting, to do green investment in terms of finance. And ultimately, one of the companies hired me, KPMG, more because I had done a little bit of work in Asia, and they wanted to open up their Asia practice. So I made them a deal that I would do this Asia consulting work, which I wasn't even sure what that was, if I could carve out 30% of my time to do what they called the environmental thing. Well, after 6 months, it was no contest. I was literally bringing in 100,000 contracts on the environmental side and was just meeting my quotas on the Asia Pacific work. And so they let me focus full time on being an environmental business consultant. I really enjoyed my time with KPMG, but was often frustrated that I would be doing research and reports and making recommendations to organizations about how they could improve their environmental and sometimes social performance. But because of organizational inertia and other reasons, they really didn't do nearly as much as I hoped they would. So at some point, I decided that I wanted to just stop talking and advising others about what they could do and really invest in a business that really did make an environmental difference on the ground. And so I wanted to look at doing a business in one of the 4 areas in which we individually have the greatest environmental impact from a lifestyle standpoint. And those are where we live, what we eat, how we travel, and what we do with our incomes. So very soon after I had made that decision to choose one of those, I was hired to do a study on the economics of sustainable community food systems. And it was there that I learned about all these alternative food retailing approaches, which involved buying directly from local producers and delivering them directly to consumers, eliminating a costly storefront and all the middle agent markups that typically happen. So people may not realize it, but it's really tragic to think that the average farmer, let's say a tomato farmer, who plants and weeds and harvests tomatoes and sells them for sale in a grocery store, and they may only get 15 cents of the selling price of that tomato, and 85 cents of the tomato is made by the parties that distribute and retail that tomato and handle it only for a few days. So I also really like this idea about grocery home delivery because it really fit 4 criteria for me for being a sustainable business. It really integrated economic, social, and environmental values. It would allow me to deliver organic, healthy food right to people's homes, saving them their transport carbon and improving their lives, saving them time, all at no extra cost. Secondly, it had the potential to change people's values and beliefs. When we ultimately started this business, Spud, we had a flyer that we sent out to all of our customers called the Garlic Press. And it was filled with all of these subliminal messages of health and sustainability when they just thought they were buying groceries. The third one was that it gives consumers the opportunity to make a huge environmental and social difference with virtually no effort, simply by shifting their shopping dollars and behavior from standing in a checkout line to going online and completing their grocery shop in minutes. They were making a difference. And finally, it had the potential to have a big impact, because after all, food is the one industry where absolutely everyone is involved. No one can say, food, no, that's not for me. So I felt like I'd found my first business idea. So I launched it in March of 1998 with an astounding level of naivety. I thought I would just run it as a small demonstration business while I got busy on working on this second business in one of the other 4 categories of how we live and how we travel and so on. I even called it Small Potatoes Urban Delivery, or SPUD for short, to emphasize that it was just a small little demonstration business. Well, within a few weeks, I was shunning my friends and rationing my bathroom breaks just to keep this little company alive. And this is where an entrepreneurial agony really kicked in as I experienced the involuntary weight loss associated with piles of cash disappearing into the black hole that I definitely called at that time a nonprofit organization. So, but through that experience, painful as it was, there was a number of lessons that I have learned to survive as an entrepreneur that I want to share with you. You see, I'd scored really high on sustainability, but failed to follow some basic business rules. The first one that's often confronted by sustainable business entrepreneurs is focus on progress, not perfection. If I'd been smart, I would have offered just a slightly wider selection of products than my competitors that were almost exclusively just selling produce, and then gradually offer more as my revenues and profits allowed. But I wasn't just satisfied with delivering produce and making people go to the grocery store for all the other items. I wanted to offer a full diet worth of groceries so people could actually avoid a shopping trip and the related carbon impacts. And that turned out to be treacherously more difficult. And here I'll give you an example of a company that did follow this advice early on, which is Hootsuite, the platform where you can go and manage your different social media platforms. When they launched their platform, they only allowed people to track 4 social media sites where they would track and post to, which was just 50% better than their competitor. But it was enough for them to gain traction, generate revenues, get to profitability, and then grow from there. The second thing that I learned is put profitability before growth. You want to get to profitability as fast as you possibly can. If you have effective marketing strategies like we did, it's way better to spend even more heavily on those marketing strategies and race to get to break even. Instead, I thought I was kind of saving money by keeping my marketing costs in line. And the result was that I kept on losing $2 to $4 on every order, so that I couldn't decide whether I should laugh or cry every time I signed up a new customer. The third one is raise twice as much money as you think you will need based on your projections until you become cash flow positive. I had to learn this the hard way, to take off my gall darn rose-colored glasses that are so loved by us entrepreneurs. I constantly convinced myself that if I just had another $50,000, I could get to break even. And then, of course, the entrepreneurial agony would rear its head as I realized that I wasn't even going to have enough money to make it through the next payroll, let alone to break even. So make sure that you raise more money than you think your projections, because there's always going to be extra money that you need. The fourth one is make sure that you don't underspend on your accounting so that you really know where you stand. Did I do that? Not a jet. I was so proud of myself for saving money on hiring a junior versus a senior bookkeeper until I realized that she was really in over her head. And the statements she produced were only fit for a creative writing class. I remember one day when I finally did hire a very competent bookkeeper and I got my first set of accurate financials, and they showed that I was losing way more money than I thought that I was. But they were accurate, and much to my agony at the time. You see, I was buying products at a certain target profit margin, but then I would have waste that would be left over. I'd have a bit of bad debt. I'd have other things. And before you know it, my margins were 25% lower. And I just couldn't afford that in the low margin grocery business. The fifth one, recommendation on managing as an entrepreneur is to be at the leading edge of the market, but not at the bleeding edge. So another company that I started was an electric bike company, which I started with some other colleagues in 2011. And we were just way too far ahead of the time. People just looked at us as though we were, what electric bikes? That's kind of a nice novelty, but why would I use that? Our view was that an electric bike is not a substitute for a bike, but it's a substitute for your commuting vehicle, and is so much cheaper and much more enjoyable. Well, now, 8 years later, it's finally caught on and is really taking off. So try to stay at the leading edge, but not the bleeding edge. And there's a few more lessons that I actually did learn. So the first one is surround yourself with smart advisors. One of the best things that I did was set up a board of advisors, and we would meet quarterly, and I would give them my toughest questions, and they would give me their answers, and then I would pay them in free groceries. Another one that I learned is love your competitors. Because when I started the business, I cared more about increasing the amount of local and sustainable food that people were eating, that I was happy to share my knowledge with my competitors and ask how, what we could do to help each other. And I could remember our company, Spud, was the very first grocery retailer in Canada to ever sell groceries online. And I remember that shortly after we did that, my largest competitor phoned me up and said, wow, that's really a good idea. Can you show me how it is that you did that? Now, normally, as a competitor, you would say, what are you talking about? I'm in business to compete with you. But I didn't do that. I actually told him, here's how you do it. They're gonna try to charge you this for these certain fees for selling online. Don't let them do that. And so he actually did start selling online. But the interesting thing is that 2 years later, he decided for his own personal reasons that he wanted to get out of the business. And because I had treated him really well and we had a really great relationship, he came to me and he said, I'm going to sell my business, but I would like to give it an opportunity for you to buy it first. And I'm going to just tell you a very fair price. I'm not going to dicker. I'm going to offer that to you. And so he did, and it was a very fair price. And I bought his company and merged it with my own. And that was a really great lesson of how being nice to your competitors really helps you. And the last bit of advice was to discover the one or two things that really make a difference to your customer, and be prepared to cut corners on the ones that they don't. For example, with Spud, one of the things that people said was important to them, but wasn't really that important, was that they wanted to get their groceries delivered on a particular day. But for our sake, it was much more economical for us to deliver to each neighborhood once a week on the same day, so that we could have density on the deliveries. And what we found is that once people started the service, they realized, why did I care that I wanted to have my groceries delivered on Saturday? I eat every day. So if my groceries get replenished on Tuesday versus Saturday, because that's the delivery day for my neighborhood, I'm okay with that. So that's really important. So on to the third topic, how can you decide if you should become an entrepreneur? Because they'll say it's not for everyone. So here's a little checklist to ask yourself if you would be good as being an entrepreneur. First question, would people describe you as more of a glass half full person or a glass half empty person? You really need to be a glass half full person if you want to be an entrepreneur. Second question, do you have an above average level of confidence? In spite of the odds, do you believe that you will find a way somehow, even though you're not sure how to do it? That's another key criteria. The third question is, do you have a reasonably high tolerance for risk? So when things go wrong, do you still have that modicum of optimism that somehow, you're not sure, but things will work out. But if this causes you a lot of stress, this is probably not a good thing for you to be an entrepreneur. And another question is, are you comfortable with multitasking? Because that's what an entrepreneur has to do all day long. And whereas, so you're working on something and you say, oh my gosh, I have to drop everything because we're out of money and I need to raise $100,000 as fast as I can. And that happens all the time as an entrepreneur. Final question is a test for you to see whether or not you'd be good as an entrepreneur is, once you get things back on track, do you promptly forget the pain that you went through, but still remember the lessons learned? That's another one that I found to be very, very helpful. So anyway, those are things that you can think about if you want to sort of decide whether you really have got what it takes to be an entrepreneur. The final one that I'll talk about is ways that you can be more entrepreneurial in non-entrepreneurial situations, just for those people in the audience who are in a job that's really not entrepreneurial and they love their job. You're not planning to quit your job, but you'd love to see what it would mean to do something a little more entrepreneurial. So the first way is, if in fact you wanted to, you didn't like the idea of being an entrepreneur, but when you are looking for a new job, use an entrepreneurial approach. It's amazing to me that 10% of jobs are given out on the public market. That means where you go to a job posting and submit an application with a whole bunch of other people. But the reality is that 90% of jobs are actually given out on the private market, which is all about connections, people that you know. So, but oddly enough, 90% of people are going to the public market. So what would you rather be? Would you rather be part of the 90% going to the public market, chasing after 10% of the jobs that are given out there? Or would you rather be part of the 10% that is on the private market, looking for jobs that are on the private market? So spending your time not going to job ads, but actually going out and meeting people, having coffee, asking them what kinds of jobs are available, doing information meetings. I often say to people starting out that, and I did this myself, I set myself a goal that I would have to do 25 meetings with people, either on the phone or in person. And and they all had to be people that I thought could give me a job or could lead me to someone who could give me a job in my field that I wanted. And that I had to finish off all of those 25 interviews. And before I'd finished those 25, I would get an offer that I would like. And in my own personal life, in my early career, when I was looking for a job, I never got past 18 out of those 25 interviews before I got a job. So the second way to be entrepreneurial in a non-entrepreneurial situation is to become an intrapreneur in your company. So do something entrepreneurial. See if you can propose an idea to say, let's do some research here about a new service or a new way of organizing our warehouse, and let's see if we can improve our efficiency and hopefully get some gains from that. And the third one is to say, well, maybe there's an opportunity to do a little bit of moonlighting on the side by becoming a micro entrepreneur in the sharing economy. It could be going on one of these sites where you rent out space in your own garage. It could be a bicycle sharing service, or a tool rental, tool lending library that you're part of, and that you earn a little bit of money, or you save a little bit of money from. But that's another way to be an entrepreneur. So to finish up, I can say without a doubt that my life as a sustainable business entrepreneur, having started 6 different companies and now coaching over 2 dozen other companies, it's had its share of agony. But the ecstasy I've enjoyed becoming a master of my own fate and not having to report to anyone but my customers has allowed me to have a career that's truly fulfilling and allowed me to build a better world. In the case of Spud, 1 grocery order at a time. In the case of the e-bike company, 1 electric bike at a time, 1 green building at a time. And now with the latest venture, 1 community crowdfunding campaign at a time. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Emily, and I look forward to hearing people's questions.
Great. Well, for starters, thank you so much, David. It's so incredible to hear how you're able to distill your experience. For those of us who identify as entrepreneurs or in the throes of the agony stages, it's really encouraging that you can speak so positively about those experiences. So yeah, let's jump right into the questions. One thing that is kind of on the top of my mind is, if someone is just starting out on their career or is pivoting now, what kind of green business ventures do you see having the most opportunities in our current, economic and social climate?
That's a good question. I'm really fascinated by the whole sharing economy, and I really feel like anything in that area, whether it is a knowledge sharing app, it is a personal goods sharing service, it's a space sharing, time sharing, anything to do with the whole collaborative economy. I really find that there's just so many interesting opportunities to do that. And the whole idea is to connect people who have something already with people who need that something, creating community at the same time, eliminating the need for people to buy that item, but instead just access it for their needs, living a lower footprint lifestyle, and again, and generating an income as a result. So I think that's one that really I'm excited about. I'd also have to say, because of my work in the food area and something to do with creating and expanding a local food economy in some way, setting up a local food store is also one that I'm really excited about.
I guess on that note, are you taking on any new coaching clients right now?
I'm not. I have my plate full. Let's say that, but I'm always happy to chat with people and still probably have space for 1 or 2 if they were really compelling projects and ideas.
Okay, great. I guess so. On the topic of your coaching clients, there's this question of, which ones are you kind of the most excited about, or might you want to highlight?
Well, some of them are in very traditional industries, and it's all about the exciting ways that they green their operations. And those are sort of harder to find in the fine grain, but some of them, their whole sustainable mission is built into the very design of their company. And that was very much so with Spud. And so some of those I think are, I'm really excited about. So I'm working with a company that is the first and largest company that is, instead of having homes be demolished when a new home is being built on the same land, to actually deconstruct them. And the company is called Unbuilders, and they are literally unbuilding and taking down all of the parts of old houses, typically built in the late 30s to early 70s, where the quality of the materials is really good, and salvaging up to 95% of those materials and finding a new home for them. And there again, that's another example of the sharing economy of, instead of buying new materials, actually capturing back those. And maybe some of you will have seen, they were just on Dragon's Den, I think in November. And I was so pleased for them that all 6 dragons wanted to invest in this idea of a green deconstruction company. I'm also invested in a company called Cielo Waste Solutions, which is taking waste literally from landfills and converting it into zero carbon renewable diesel. And I think they will be a really exciting company to watch as they grow. And finally, one that I'm really working on right now is called Legible Media, and the idea is to become the Spotify for books. So ebooks, of course, have taken off greatly, but most companies that are selling books in an ebook format make their money from the sale of the hardware that goes with it. If it's a Kobe device or it's a Kindle device, that's where they make their money. Whereas this company is wanting to make books accessible even to people in low-income countries in India and Africa. And so they don't want to have any barriers. There's no app. You just go right into your browser and you can start reading books, and even doing a pay-per-page kind of micro payment, making it much more affordable and accessible to people. And I'm really excited about that.
Ooh, I'm excited about that too.
Mm-hmm.
So related, actually, I think, to the focus that you have on the built environment, we have a question from Harvey here. Do you see opportunities for entrepreneurs with passive house as buildings are moving towards the standard and municipalities are, bringing in regulation towards passive house building standards?
Absolutely. I think that will grow. I have an idea for an even more exciting segue into the building market, because we have a lot of good technologies, but still, because of the way the financial incentives in the building industry work, it makes it hard to get those implemented. And one of the challenges is this thing called the split incentive. And that is that often those people who are building a passive house, they do have some extra costs. But it's very hard for to get the buyer to be willing to pay extra relative to those costs. But there is a way around that, which is to separate the ownership of the energy system, or all of the improvements that are reducing energy, in case of passive house, thicker walls and better insulation, and put those into a separate company that actually invest in those, and then those are paid back out over time, and changes the whole financial model. And one thing I'm really excited related to the sharing economy is to make that collaborative, and so that the people who are using the energy get to be part and owners in that system. So it's a little hard to explain, but imagine that you lived in a 100-unit condominium in which they were each unit is owned by the owners. And let's say that it was a 1950s building that was very energy efficient. The owners could get together and they could create a little company called Building Name Utility Company, and they could invest in lighting upgrades and in ground source heat pumps and sewage heat recovery systems, all that would pay back within a few years. And they would then, from the savings that they would get, they would recoup those costs over time. And I think that's a really great opportunity. So where I would say is in the green building space, it has as much to do with how you organize the financing as it does about the building technology that you're promoting.
Interesting. Okay. On the topic of financing, what are some of the hardest won lessons that you've learned about financing your companies? Did you take an external investment to start up a green business? When you talk about, raising double the amount you think you need, that's a pretty high target. So what are your thoughts around early stage financing for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. It always is, and to figure out how to raise the money that you're raising, because you don't want to give up a huge amount of equity when your company is not worth very much. One of the types of financing that I find works really well for young entrepreneurs is, and again, it's about how you structure the money, not just going out and getting it. So it's really hard to get debt financing when you haven't built up many assets. And if you go and get equity financing, then you're giving up a lot of your ownership in the company before you've had a chance to grow it. So coming up with a hybrid model, which is called a convertible debenture, is a really great way to do that. So with that, what you do is you say to an investor lender, okay, I would like to get a loan from you for $100,000, let's say, and I will pay you 8% interest. I'll pay you 4% every month, but the other 4% will leave as a balloon payment for the end of 2 years. At the end of 2 years, then you as a lender get the opportunity to convert into equity, or you get the opportunity to have it paid back out over time. So then what happens is, as an entrepreneur, your goal is to grow the company as fast as possible and get it to be worth much more than it was at the time that you were looking for financing, so that when they do convert, then maybe you're only giving up 10 or 15% of the company, whereas otherwise you might have to be giving up 40 or maybe even 50% of the company. So that was one of the big lessons for me, is to find ways like that where I'm aligned with the investor. We both want to grow the company, and I'm really motivated to do the best I can, because then I'll give up less equity. Yes, the investor gets less equity, but they're getting smaller equity on a much more valuable company, because I've now had the 2 years or 3 years to grow the company.
Oh, such great advice. Okay, so leveraging, early on leverage. Um,
Mm-hmm.
That's so useful, and I hope everyone's taking notes on what to go Google afterwards. I know I'm going to be Googling a couple of those phrases, which actually relates to this question around, for especially young entrepreneurs. What advice would you give yourself as a brand new graduate, or specifically Christians asking for their students at Villa Maria College who are enrolled in case studies in business ethics? Like, what advice would you offer these young burgeoning entrepreneurs who are probably still in their teen years?
Well, one thing is that you can do entrepreneurial things even in your teenage years. I mean, there's fantastic examples of people doing stuff where they agree to buy back their fellow students' school books and then sell them to the next year's crop of students and make 20%. And so there's all kinds of creative, low-cost ways to do it. Often because young people really haven't had the opportunity to be in the workforce for a significant amount of time, they don't have cash to start up. So the idea is to start with some kind of business that almost requires no cash. So that example of buying school books and then selling them, maybe they'd have to do a twist on that and say, I don't have the money to do that, but I'll do them on consignment. You're finished with the book, so you don't need it. And so if you let me have it until the next term, and I'll sell it, and then I will pay you back from it less a commission, then you don't have the upfront cash. So really look for businesses that don't require that that extra upfront capital needs, and there's a number of them. In fact, even in my grocery home delivery businesses, often my competitors would start by getting 100 customers to pledge to get a basket of produce, for example, and then they would go and buy the produce from local farms, pack them into orders, and deliver them. And so relatively low cash requirements to do a simple business model.
Okay.
The other thing I should have said about, in answer to the last question about what financing advice do you have, one really important thing that I forgot to mention that is so key if you're trying to raise money for a business is to say to yourself, the money is one part, but what's equally and possibly even more important is who the investor is and how strategic an investor they are. Because it's often the extra value. Once they become an investor, they become an ambassador for the company. And if they have contacts in a certain industry that you're working in, and they can make connections that will turn into more sales from you, it's really more important to get someone who's a strategic investor than someone that is just providing the cash that you need. Sometimes you still have to rely on that if you're in sort of tough straits, but always favor looking for the investor who will provide more than money, but also these strategic connections and advice and knowledge.
So fantastic. That relates to a question around partnership. Have you been a co-founder of some of your initiatives, or has it been exclusively you? And if you've had some partners, what kind of criteria go into deciding whether to partner with someone?
That's a really good, I have done both. I have started businesses on my own, but most businesses, I would say, I have started with other partners. And there it's all about developing a really good level of trust and also a working relationship. It's one thing to meet people and say, oh, let's start this business, and you don't really know each other. I find that those partnerships, and I've noticed that with my clients that I coach, often they will start as partnerships where someone who had money wants to work with an entrepreneur who has an idea, but they haven't really worked with each other very long. And in those kinds of situations, it's usually the marriage doesn't last. And then before you know it, they're trying to figure out ways on how they can disentangle themselves from one another. I have actually had the good fortune that I've never had partnerships that have turned into anything acrimonious, although we have, in the case of the electric bike business, realized that we just came to the market too early. We sold off all the bikes and just gently closed that business down and went our ways because we just were too early to the market. But this idea of starting and working on something together, some small part of the business or something where you really actually get to work together in some way on the ground on a daily basis or a weekly basis, where you're getting together and then finding out if it really is the right partnership. Because even within a few months of working together, you start realizing whether or not your working styles and approach and even your goals are compatible with one another.
That's really helpful. Working styles, approach, and goals. Like, those are three really solid criteria to match with.
And I guess the last thing I would say is all about keeping the karma high, recognizing that sometimes partnerships don't work, and then working to really treat each other as honorably as possible so that you can part ways and recognize that while the partnership didn't work, you're not neither of you are left with a bittersweet taste in your mouth about it, because you've treated each other fairly and tried to look out for the other party's interests, and so that also, I find, works really well, because when that partner goes to talk to other people, they don't trash talk you, because you really work to try to keep the karma high. And a lot of people just sort of forget it. They go, oh, it's that relationship is lost. Oh, there's nothing to be salvaged. And then they can leave acrimonious, not realizing that that person's endorsement back of you is actually could be important in finding an investor for that next venture or whatever. So really important to keep the karma high.
Ooh, very good insight. It's interesting what you're talking about also is similar to just working in teams. And this relates to your experience. And I think an experience a lot of us have is starting with employment. Like your career started with employment and you moved to entrepreneurship. How useful was this as a precursor to entrepreneurship? Would you recommend people have some employment experience in companies before becoming an entrepreneur?
I think it is really, really helpful. I think the biggest thing about working in a company before, for at least some part of your career before you become an entrepreneur, is really helpful, because you really learn what it takes to be part of a team. When you become an entrepreneur, often you become the leader of the team. But those skills about how to behave in a team, how to motivate the team, uh, having been on the other side of it as a team member who had a boss, you can really emphasize with those employees. Whereas entrepreneurs that have never had any significant work experience before they became an entrepreneur often are not the best bosses. And it is also really a great and important thing for you to feel like you can be remembered as a good boss when you move on from another organization. And again, that's another example of always keeping the karma high, which should be at the top of the list for all sustainable business entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's a great tagline for your coaching business. An interesting question coming in from Camille is, what's the advantage of starting a business versus a nonprofit, specifically when it comes to achieving the mission or having the widest impact?
Right. Well, often it has to do with the kind of business that you're going to run. If it is it has the potential to actually generate a significant profit, then it's probably easiest to set it up as a for-profit company, because it's easier to raise money than it is for a nonprofit. But if the goals are such that it's hard to imagine how it would make much more than a modest profit, it then can be much better to set it up formally as a nonprofit. Often the founder of a good nonprofit can get paid a reasonably good wage, and they have access to funding sources that a for-profit company doesn't. And the fact is that they never expected to make much of a profit, so they're not so worried if they're not able to keep that profit. They can flow it back into the business. So there's a number of organizations that I've actually recommended that they actually charter themselves as a nonprofit social enterprise. I'm really big on almost all sustainable nonprofits trying to find a good amount of their revenues that are earned revenues, so that they minimize the amount of time that they have to spend looking for funding every single year. And there are lots of creative ways. And so often the goal with a nonprofit is, how do we maximize every possible earned revenue stream that we can for our enterprise? And it's often much more than you think. I've doing some research on a wildlife center that was trying to raise money, and they were getting maybe 20% of their total revenues from programs or from the gift center at their wildlife center. But you look around at some of the leading wildlife centers in the world, they're all nonprofits, and yet some of them are earning 85 to 90% of their revenues from programs and services, from an online web store, and all kinds of things that help them to expand their mission and minimize the amount of funding that they have to raise to cover costs, so that their survival is much more greatly ensured over a long period of time.
Thank you. Such an important question in the early stages for any entrepreneurial venture. We are coming up on the hour shortly, so I'm going to hopefully sneak in a couple other questions. I want to thank everyone for being here and encourage you to please still get in your questions in the chat, and we will collect them afterwards. And David has graciously offered to answer them. So please do still submit your questions. But one that I do share with this questioner is Mark asking, when are you going to write your book? You've basically got the table of contents already set.
Yes, I do not have even a spare moment of time at the end of each day to think about that. But yes, it probably would be a fun retirement project to do. As you can imagine, especially during this COVID era, I spend most of my time on Zoom calls and facing a computer. So the idea of thinking that after dinner, I'm going to go back and open up my computer and spend more time working at the computer doesn't appeal to me at all right now. But I probably would like to, at some point, do some kind of booklet or guide on Dave's rules of thumb for being a sustainable business entrepreneur.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to help you write that book if possible. We'll see. I'll follow up after. A question that maybe is a little bit longer, but just really quickly, wondering how important formal business training is to be a successful entrepreneur. You did an MBA, but many people might not have the means to do that. Can it be self-taught to learn the business aspects, like when you talk about profitability over growth? Or maybe what parts of the MBA have helped you the most as an entrepreneur? High-level topics.
Right. That's a really interesting one, because certainly when it comes to understanding finances and understanding accounting statements, my MBA really helped me. But many of the courses that I took in my MBA were for being a manager in a very large organization. Courses like statistics that really apply if you're working in an organization that's doing large numbers of surveys and things like that. But as an entrepreneur, I would say the amount of time that I had to use any kind of sophisticated statistics were really, really small. So I think you can learn it. And as long as you surround yourself with people, and this is a good advice for all entrepreneurs, surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, that can fill that. And as long as you feel, and maybe I should have added that to another question to decide whether you're a good entrepreneur is, do I have street smarts? Because street smarts are really the biggest difference. I have worked with entrepreneurs that have formal business training, and they're not nearly as good as other entrepreneurs that didn't have that formal training, but just had that street smarts, trying to figure out creative things. I'll give you an example of this idea of just a constant creative thinking about how to do things. You know the fashion designer Kenneth Cole. So Kenneth Cole wanted to start his shoe company. And in the shoe world, the only way that you would have success is you have to go to New York, and you have to go to this one hotel at a certain time of year where the entire hotel rents out every room, and each shoe company takes a room or multiple rooms and sells their shoes. And it's super expensive to get in. It's almost impossible. And so he thought, I've only got 3 pairs of shoes and 4 colors and 4 of each shoe, so 12 SKUs. And I'm unknown. How can I break through? And so he went and said, I think if I parked a truck out in front of the hotel, then I could put the name of my company, Kenneth Cole Shoes, on there, and everyone would notice it. And so we went to the city and said, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to rent an 18-wheeler truck and put it in front of the hotel, and I'd like to rent those parking spots. How much would you charge me for that? And they said, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. The only people that can do that are movie companies. And so he thought, movie companies? Okay, so he went and changed the name of his company to Kenneth Cole Media Productions, Inc. And he said, I'm going to make a movie about how I started a shoe company. And they looked and I guess, yeah, that fits. Okay, you can do it. And he sold 40,000 pairs of shoes at that trade show, because absolutely everyone had to walk by this unusual looking shoe store. And he actually trumped and jumped ahead of everyone and got into business. So it's that kind of street smarts and creative thinking in situations that is way more important as an entrepreneur than any formal training.
Thank you so much. What an amazing case study example to close out that final advice. Gosh, okay, we've hit the hour. Thank you so much, David, for sharing with us all of these lessons. I can't wait to watch the recording, actually. I'm going to have to take notes when I'm not asking the questions. And thank you, everyone who's joined us here today. So FYI, to stay current on future McGill events, you can visit alumni.mcgill.ca. Update your contact information, make sure they've got your email, and you can also follow McGill Alumni on social media. For people in Vancouver, like David and myself, there's actually a McGill Alumni Association of Vancouver Facebook page specific to this region. And again, I want to thank Juliana, Rula, Craig, and Anna for working behind the scenes to make this event happen. David for taking the time to bring us together today to reflect on entrepreneurship, and wishing everyone a safe, mindful, happy, and mostly virtual holiday season.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks to McGill for giving me my great environmental education that kickstarted it all off.
Ditto. Well put. Have a lovely day, everyone.